Thanks for joining me in today's video Bible study. My name is Ryan Goodwin. I preach for the East Shelby Church of Christ in Collierville, Tennessee. If you have questions or comments about what we study today, you can leave them in the comment section below, or you can find more information about our church at eastshelby.com. We've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes, and we'll be in chapter 9 today. So, if you've got your Bible handy, open up to the Old Testament and go to Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 1. It reads, "For I have taken all this to my heart, and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him." The conclusions that he's drawn from his experiment so far seem logical and reasonable to him. And he spent a lot of time in his book considering things like life and vanity and emptiness and even, at times, contentment and godliness. And in the next section of Scripture here, in chapter 9, Solomon's going to spend some time examining death. Death, which is the great equalizer. Death that awaits all of us. Death that is the inevitable end, whether you've been a righteous person or a wise person, or an unrighteous person and a fool. We're all going to die one day. So what does it mean? What are some of the conclusions that Solomon draws on the subject of death? Now, I like the way he puts it here in chapter 1. Whether it's love or hatred, man does not know. Anything awaits him. His deeds are left in the hand of God. This life is full of uncertainties, and it's also full of accidents. There's coincidences, and there are things that we believe are coincidences, but really, they're just the products of our own activities. They're traps that we set for ourselves unwittingly. We don't even realize it. The choices that we make today lead to consequences that we might not see for years and years and years later. And so we move through life. Each day that we wake up, we move through life with a great deal of uncertainty. And only God alone fully understands exactly where we're going. A couple other verses from the Old Testament that I think clarify this. In the book of Proverbs, in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 9, the writer there says, "The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." You know, we make all kinds of plans. We say that 2020 it's going to be my year. 2020 is finally going to be the year that I qualify for the Boston Marathon. 2020 is going to be the year that I finally finish school. 2020 is going to be the year that I find love. And we make all of these plans. And then something happens in 2020 that we never could have anticipated. Something that we never thought to build into our agenda for the year. And it surprises us. It catches us off guard. So in spite of all the plans that we might make for ourselves, well, time and chance overtake us all. Coincidence happens. Things that we could not have planned. Things that are only in the hand of God. Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 23 also makes a very similar statement there. I don't want you to be discouraged, though, about this, because it kind of looks like that on the outside in verse 1. You know, you could be a righteous person. You could be a wise person. You can leave your deeds in the hand of God, and you still move through life uncertain about what's going to happen to you. And he's blunt about it, isn't he? Whether it's love or hatred, anything awaits him. You have no idea if this is going to be a good day or a bad day. And you can come into this day with all the positive feelings in the world. You can believe in karma. You can believe in good vibes. You can believe that in the power of just positive thinking. Like if you just will yourself toward a goal, then all your goals are going to come true in this life. You can think that if you want to. But ultimately, you don't have control over a lot of things in this life. You don't have control over the weather, the environment around you. You don't have control over the economy. You don't have control over politics. You don't have control over what happens in the next town over. You barely have control over what happens in your own backyard, let alone worrying about what happens in some other far-flung place in the world. You really don't have a lot of control. And so some days it's love, and some days it's hate. Anything can await you. Now he goes on in verses 2 and 3 to say the following. It is the same for all. There's one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice and for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. Verse 3, there's an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all people. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. We need to understand that Solomon is speaking from the perspective as one who sees things in a worldly way, right? This is one of the points in the book where he is looking at things without God being factored in. Life under the sun, that's the phrase that he keeps using throughout the book. That if you take God out of the equation and just look at the way things are, and if you just look at the way things are, you'd have to come to the same conclusion as him. But there have been plenty of righteous people, good people, honorable people, wholesome people that have died in ridiculous ways. Good people that die in car accidents. Good people, right? There are people who've never had a sip of alcohol in their lives who have died in a car accident because somebody else got drunk and decided to drive down the freeway that night. How do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of the good young man, the patriotic young man who loves his country and signs up for military service? And it is the corrupt politicians, and I'm not being cynical here, I'm just saying that a lot of people have this perspective, but it's the corrupt politicians that are ones that start wars. And so it's good young men who are just patriotic, who love their country, who love their community. They're the ones dying in battlefields on the other side of the earth. How do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of the collateral damage in a bank robbery? How do you make sense of the innocent bystander who has nothing to do with the crime that's being committed and just happened to be the wrong place at the wrong time? And more broadly speaking, what do you make of Christianity? Christianity that is supposed to be God's kingdom on earth. Christianity that is supposed to be the body of the saved. Christianity, those people who serve and love God with all their hearts, who give up everything for Him, who are nevertheless persecuted because of their faith. While evil dictators live in luxury, and all of their cohorts and confederates and the people who work for them, their cronies and their thugs, they also live in great luxury. What do we make of it? What a vain thing it is if you don't factor God into the equation, if you just look at things as they are. What a vain thing it is that it is the same for all people. It is the same for all people. And it doesn't matter if you're righteous or wicked, if you're clean or unclean, if you offer sacrifices, or if you just don't care about sacrifices at all. It's an evil, he says in verse 3, an evil that's done under the sun, that there's one fate for all men. Now, let's understand that when we start looking at this from a God perspective, right? When you do factor God into the equation, there is an answer for this. And the answer is that this life is not all there is. The answer is that you can't look at things just as they are. You're missing a huge part of the equation if you just look at things the way that they are. If you just look at things the way that they are, I think you might look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul the Apostle says, if there's no resurrection, if you don't factor in the spiritual in any of this, and we're all just people living on planet Earth, we're the most pathetic people who've ever lived. Christians, that is. Because Christians have forsaken some of the temptations of the world. They've forsaken some of the privileges that we get to enjoy as human beings living hedonistic, pleasure-filled lives. We have forsaken those things in order to live righteously before God. Holiness comes with a cost. To be holy in God's eyes means you can't have sex with anybody that you want. Holiness in God's eyes means you can't become slobbering drunk on a Friday night just because you feel like it. Holiness in God's eyes means telling the truth even when telling the truth comes with some personal cost. When lying would have saved your skin or saved your job, or lying would have gotten you ahead, or lying would have gotten you that would have gotten you that promotion that you've always wanted. Well, holiness in the eyes of God kind of makes us into pretty pathetic people in a worldly sense. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul is being very blunt. We are of all men most to be pitied if there is no resurrection. If there is no true spiritual component to all of this, we're pretty pathetic people. And there doesn't appear to be much difference between the righteous person and the unrighteous person. So let's pick up here in verse 4. For whoever is joined with the living, there's hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for the memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they'll no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. This is Solomon just being pragmatic about this, isn't he? He's just being pragmatic about the idea that, hey, it's better to be alive than to be dead. I mean, if all other things being equal, it would be better to be alive and to be just a lowly dog, just a mangy, scavenging dog. But hey, at least you're alive, than to be a dead lion. A lion with all that glory, with that great mane of hair on his head. Be better to be a living dog, mangy as they are, than to be a dead lion and to have all that glory. I mean, I don't know if this is true in every practical sense. And I don't know if it's true when you start to factor in, again, the God component to the equation. But he's just being practical here. He's just being a pragmatist. Better to be alive than dead. Better to be alive than dead. You know what's interesting is I don't know if a lot of the saints would share that same mentality. Better to be alive than dead. Paul the Apostle, for example, struggled with this idea a little bit in Philippians chapter 1. If you go to the New Testament and notice here in Philippians chapter 1, he says in verse 21, now this is him struggling with, if I die for my faith, well, what have I gained? If I die for my faith, what have I lost? If I live on and continue to work, what have I gained and what have I lost? And here he is kind of balancing those two things in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. For to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I don't know which to choose. Not that it's really any of our choices anyway, where our lives are in God's hands. But he does say in verse 23, I am hard-pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. And so this idea that, hey, it'd be better to be alive than dead, better to be a living dog than a dead lion, that's just Solomon just putting 2 + 2 = 4, just as things are, as they appear to be, life under the sun. That's just what makes sense to Solomon. You know the great thing about death, though? Death provides a finality to this chapter of our existence. We move on to the next chapter in all of its glory and all of its beauty. Death provides us the opportunity to stand in the presence of God once and for all, face to face, to be judged by Him, so that the way that we've lived is laid bare before Him, so that all of our deeds, whether they're righteous or unrighteous, are finally given an account. There's benefit to death. I don't think that if you factor in God, if you think about things from a Christian perspective, a God perspective, I don't think that you want life to continue on forever, as it is at least. In Romans chapter 8, the same apostle, Paul, wrote in Romans chapter 8 that this whole world is groaning and it's aching. This whole world, the creation itself, the animals and the trees and the environment that surrounds us, the very planet is groaning and it's aching. It is moving forward through time with all these pains, and it longs to be set free. It longs to be set free. So I guess my point is this, that as you're studying the book of Ecclesiastes, be careful that you don't become cynical. Don't fall for the cynicism that says, better to be alive than dead. I mean, whether you're righteous or unrighteous, good or bad, clean or unclean, we're all just going to die anyway, so it doesn't really matter how you live. What a vain and empty and evil thing it is, that whether you've been good or bad, we all just end up dying. It's the same fate for all men. Don't fall for that cynicism. Because the fact is, when you look at the Bible as a whole, and you look at everything that the Bible says on this subject, our fates are not all the same. In Matthew chapter 25, the end of that chapter, Jesus offers us a picture of what it's going to be like at the end of all things. God will come back in judgment, and on the right hand there will be sheep. On the left hand there will be goats. The sheep lived for God. They made choices, they had faith. They expressed that faith in love and charity and compassion. And the goats on the left hand did not. They withheld their charity and withheld their love and their compassion. And you can see from that chapter, there is a different fate. One goes to the Lord to enjoy His presence for all eternity, and the other group does not. It joins the devil and all of his angels in eternal torment. Let's go on here in verses 5 and 6 and notice just one quick point before we move on to verse 7. The living know they'll die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward. Their memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, their zeal have already perished. They'll no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. I think there is a good positive point to be made from this. In spite of what seems to be bitterness and cynicism on the outside, I think there's a really good point that you can make from this chapter, and that is, you do have one life to live. And at the end of this life, the book is closed. And you don't get to keep reading the news. You don't get to check your email. You don't get to come back as a ghost and kind of check how everybody's doing. Right? When you die, your activity on planet Earth is over. You don't get to show back up as a ghost and go visit your grandkids and see, oh, did you ever become an artist like you wanted to? Did you ever learn to play the ukulele like you always wanted to? You don't get to come back and check on how your descendants are doing. You don't get to check on politics and pick up the most recent USA Today and read about what's going on in America. You don't get to see a repeat or a replay of the Super Bowl last year. That's it. When you die, that's it. Your love, your hate, your zeal, it's perished. You no longer have a share in anything that's done under the sun. You no longer have a share in this world. You have one life to live. Make sure that you fit in to one life what you know you need to do. Make sure that you spend your life, whether it's a short life or a long life, whether you have many, many years to come or you die tomorrow, make sure that you can say that you took advantage of your life to the fullest, that you lived for God every day, because you don't really know how much more time you have. And I'd hate to go to the judgment day with a lot of unfinished business, spiritually speaking. I'd hate to go to the judgment day and God confront me and say, so, did you ever get around to improving your prayer life? Did you ever get around to honing that spiritual discipline that you always said you would? Did you ever get around to obeying the gospel plan of salvation? When you knew what you needed to do to be saved, did you do it? Or did you neglect it for another day? You have one life to live, and you don't get to come back and complete all the unfinished business that you didn't get around to doing. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 7. Let's move on now here to verse 7. Go then, Eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful face, for God has already approved your works. Verse 8, let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Now, I think there's two ways that you can take these verses. You can take it as the pessimistic way, and you can say that Solomon is just kind of throwing his hands up in the air and just sort of saying, like, if that's how life is, if we're all going to die anyway, and it doesn't really matter how you live, just live to the fullest. Do what you want, right? Do what you want. Doesn't matter what people think. Doesn't matter who cares. Just live how you want. And spend and eat and never be lacking with good things. And if you got oil, pour it on your head. If you got food, fill your belly with it. If you got clothes, wear those fancy clothes. Wear those fancy clothes. Now, that's one way to take it. Here's the way I take it. I think we get this glimmer of the hopefulness and optimism and righteousness that I know that Solomon had deep down inside, kind of buried under layers of, idolatrous wives, buried under layers of living a vain, opulent, luxurious life, buried under layers of frustration and disappointment. There was still that righteousness, that spark inside of him that said, we need to be living the way we should be living. Eat your bread in happiness, drink with a cheerful face. God has already approved your works. Now, I think what he's saying is not that God approves of everything that you do, but what he's saying is when you're living the right way, when you are living righteously and making good choices, God has approved that life. God has put a stamp of approval on righteous people who say, I am going to live for God, and I'm going to live to the fullest, and I am going to live with optimism and positivity. I'm going to live with cheerfulness. I am going to live with the hope and the knowledge and the certainty that I have God on my side and God in my life. And if you live like that, if that is your approach to life, God has approved your works. And factor in verse 8, let your clothes be white all the time, let not oil be lacking on your head. I don't take this verse to be a literal thing, like always wear white clothes, because, we all know the saying about Labor Day and white clothes. I don't think he's literally saying wear white clothes all the time. He's not literally saying have well-conditioned hair. I think he's making a symbolic statement about morality. Live with the purity of white clothes. Live with the underlying divine joy that accompanies a life of spiritual abundance, where you have rich spiritual blessings in God, and it is those things that give you true joy, lasting contentment, meaning, and purpose. Let your clothes be white all the time is an exhortation that you live in the light of God's judgment. Know that God will bring all of your deeds to judgment in the end, so you better make sure you're living righteously and morally. Live white and pure and clean in the eyes of God. I think that's what Solomon is saying. Now, maybe that's just me being an optimist. He goes on to say in verse 9, enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he's given you under the sun, for this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Just think about the irony of this statement. A man who had 700 wives and 300 concubines on top of that said it would be better to have one life who you actually love. I know that there's a temptation out there to feel like think about how happy it would be if you could just have sex with anybody that you wanted. You could just kind of live it up and have and free love and open relationships and I'm not, I don't believe in just being attached to one person, one ball and chain for your life. I've just got too much love to give. And I know there's that temptation, if subtly, even in Christians' lives, that if only we could just have that freedom to sleep with anybody that we wanted, wouldn't that just be great? Think about what Solomon is saying here in verse 9. a man who had 1,000 sexual partners, a man who could essentially go 3 or 4 years and sleep with a different woman every night, says, your reward in life is to find one woman who you actually love. Enjoy life with not women, plural. Enjoy life with the woman, singular. The woman who you actually love. And enjoy it all the days of your fleeting life. That's going to be hard. Because when you find one woman or one man, because I think this applies equally whether you're a man or a woman. I know he says woman, but he's speaking from the perspective of Solomon the man. And so I think it's as true a statement to say that if you're a woman, it's better to find one man who you love and share that life with him all the days of your fleeting life. So I think that it's true whether you're a husband or a wife in this case. But Solomon, speaking from his perspective, he's saying it would be better to just enjoy that life. And it's going to be hard. There will be days where it's harder to enjoy life with your spouse than other days. But taken as a whole, the commitment between a husband and a wife that lasts 20 years, then 30 years, then 40 years, then 50 years, and even 60 years. Taken as a whole, that lifelong commitment to a spouse, to a husband or a wife, yeah, you've got bumpy days, right? You've got days that are a little rockier than other days. Not every day is going to be easy or beautiful. Not every day is going to be worth taking a photo and putting it on Instagram, okay? Not every day is Instagrammable. So that's a word, right, young people? I don't know if I'm making that one up or not. Not every day is going to be great. But taken as a whole, you enjoy life every single day to the fullest with the one person who you actually love, than to fall headlong into sin. Let's go on to verse 10 now. Verses 10 through 12. Verses 10 through 12. Whatever your hand finds to do, verily do it with all your might, for there's no activity or planning or wisdom in Sheol, that's the grave, where you are going. I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. Moreover, man does not know his time, like fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare. So the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. You just don't know what today is going to bring. You have no idea. Did anybody wake up that morning and say, today I think I'm going to get in that car wreck on the freeway? Does anybody ever wake up and say, hey, you know what, today I think I'm going to plan for that aneurysm that's really going to knock me out. Today I think my mom's going to die today. Probably my mom's going to die today. I'm going to get that phone call that I've been dreading all these years. I'm going to lose my job today. Probably going to lose my job today, right? Probably going to lose my job today. It's like the dread pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride. Good job today, Wesley. Get a good night of sleep. I'm going to kill you in the morning. You just don't know what today is going to bring. You just don't know. And so in verses 11 and 12, he says, I've looked out at the world and I have seen the swift lose the race. I have seen the strong lose the battle. I have seen the wise lose out on an investment. I've seen strong people, fast people, and smart people who are just ruined. And I suppose you could also say, I've seen slow people and weak people and idiots somehow or another snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Now, he ends this chapter by presenting this little parable in verses 13 through 18. He says this, also, this I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. That's interesting, something that actually impressed Solomon. There was a small city, in verse 14, A small city with very few men in it, and a great king came to it and surrounded it and constructed siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered the poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength. But the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. The words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. These are some things that frustrate Solomon. It frustrates Solomon that he could look at this story, whether it was a story that he heard or maybe he's talking about a personal anecdote from his own life. There was a small city, very few warriors in it, and a great king surrounded it, and the city was saved because a poor, wise man outsmarted the great king. Now, he doesn't tell us how he outsmarted him. He doesn't give us the details of how he outsmarted him, but nevertheless, we've heard many stories like this. I mean, that's, I think, one of the great elements of a really good story, when against all odds, David beats Goliath. And so this poor wise man outsmarts the great king and saves his little town, his little hometown. But nobody shows any honor to him. They forget all about it. They forget the way this poor wise man rescued them. And so Solomon is left wondering, I feel like I have two very conflicting ideas here. On the one hand, based on this little story, this little anecdote, on the one hand, wisdom is better than weapons of war, isn't it? Because wisdom can often beat weapons of war. If you're just smart enough, just clever enough, you can outsmart somebody who's stronger than you. You can outsmart somebody who's got a bigger gun or a bigger stick if you're just clever enough. But then on the other hand, here's the thing that's vexing. On the other hand, this wise man received no honor. People forgot all about him. Nobody remembered him. But we remember great kings. We remember Alexander the Great, and we remember Caesar. And are weapons of war really defeated by wisdom? If it's the weapons of war that seem to last beyond the wisdom? There are some very frustrating things that Solomon has to confront in the book of Ecclesiastes, and this is just one of them. Now, he's going to proceed in chapters 10, 11, and 12 to start bringing his thoughts together. And he's going to conclude this book, I think, if you've never read it at least, he's going to conclude this book in a very shocking and powerful way. But you've got to stick around to find out what that end is. So tune in next time as we get into chapter 10. If you have any questions about what we've studied today, if you'd like to make a comment, leave it in the comment section below. Reach out to the East Shelby Church of Christ. We'd love to study with you and help you with whatever spiritual need that you have. My friends, keep studying, keep asking good questions, and as always, have a wonderful and blessed day.